So with the poetry, the book, the album, the journal, like what's your intention? How are you when someone reads one of your poems or listens to you perform it on the album, are you kind of thinking about how you want them to feel?
Well, I'm the first person in my audience. So when I'm creating, I'm thinking about the breadcrumb trail of whatever it is that I want to explore. It's something that moves me, something that pisses me off, something that inspires me, and I'll snatch it out of my day and write it down. And then I'll come back to it later, and the rest of the poem will almost write itself if I give it enough time and enough space, because it started in a place of truth. If I was like searching for something that I thought either the audience wanted to hear or some truth that I thought would resonate, I think I would miss the truth, because the truth is universal, but it also comes through your personal lens. So I actually didn't want anything from the audience when I was creating these poems or when I made the album. The journal is a bit different because the journal scales the storytelling sessions that I do in person, and it uses the album's poems as a base for that, because in each chapter there's a poem from the album, and then there's prompts, and then there's context about writing poetry and sharing suggestions and memorization tips and all sorts of things that basically by design gives people a modern the artist's way, basically through poetry, to explore their lives and empower themselves in a way that they probably wouldn't choose to do through this genre. And you don't have to be a poet to do it. You just have to be a person that decides to dedicate yourself to a creative practice. So with that, I definitely wanted something, but I don't want something from them that is confining. I want something from them that's expansive, which is I want them to dive in, and whatever is there for them is what was supposed to be there for them, you know?
So for you, it starts with an experience or an idea. Well, at what point does it go from kind of journaling something to poetry? What is poetry? So I think a lot of the listeners they journal. They might be familiar with that, but might not be sure of the distinction between writing down your emotions, expressing them in the written word, and then developing that into a poem.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is if you intend something to be a poem, it's a poem. And no one can tell you any different. So I don't think there's like stylistic requirements for that. I think you just have to sit down and say, I'm writing a poem. And then you're writing a poem. And then after you're finished with it, you have to read it to somebody. You have to be witnessed. Because when you are, you can, I think, truly release that thing into the world.
That's the vulnerability piece.
Yes. The first stage is kind of like crystallizing the story outside of yourself. So you have to choose something that's moving and meaningful, and then you crystallize it outside of yourself by creating, and you can see that thing as separate from you. And then when you share it with somebody, you see how connected we all are. Because even though the circumstances are different, the stories are the same.
And because you see it as separate to you, it makes it easier to share than if you were just going to speak about your feelings without having it kind of organized into a poem.
I think so, yeah. At least it is for me. You know, that's why the album was so vulnerable, because of the conversation with my wife, which is the through line of the record. I'm pretty good at telling vulnerability, but it's different to show vulnerability. And there is an amazing, amazing alchemy that comes from creating a poem and crystallizing it outside of yourself and then sharing it with somebody. But you're still making something. So it's controlled. And you're deciding then when and how to share it. So there's a frame for it. But that conversation with my wife is frameless. You know, it was just a very deep conversation that was recorded, that was not intended to be displayed. And so there was a level of vulnerability that is scary for me, but I'm kind of doing what you were doing earlier, or at least talking about, which is like, I mean, I want to lead by example. And so here we are.
Yeah, you said to me off air that I asked you how you're feeling about the album being released into the wild. And you said mixed emotions. And that part, that intimate part, scares you a little bit to share that with the world?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would like to pretend like it doesn't.
What has poetry kind of revealed for you? Like, what are the big ticket items that you've learned about yourself through poetry?
Well, self-awareness, compassion for myself and others. I think that it's made me a better citizen of the world. You know, I try to treat people the way that I want to be treated, because behind all the armor and the disguises that I have and other people have, I have pulled back the curtains over and over and over again through art. And I've seen how beautiful people are, even in their ugly. Our culture teaches us to look up to people or down on people. It doesn't teach us to look at people.
Just see them.
Yeah, it's scary, man. When you look at people, it's scary because you see yourself. So it's easier to go like this or go like that. You know, it feels better. It feels more satisfying, but it's not supportive, and it's not healthy.
Do the kind of takeaways, the lessons, what's revealed through the poetry, do they come when you have that idea and when you've just written it down, or do they come through the actual development of the poem?
Both. Yeah. The best poems for me are the poems where I'm surprised at the end, or when I suddenly get emotional because I didn't expect the next line to come, or I didn't know that thing was going to emerge from inside of me. And that's why with this book, I try to give people the roadmap to go into themselves. So like, for example, from the poem that I did at the beginning, I'll just like briefly read you the prompts for it, because I think it like will give some context. So after that poem, there's this section about growth, and it basically asks you, what is one important area in your life that you're trying to grow in? It could be personal, professional, mental, physical, emotional, or spiritual. Is there anything stopping you from stepping into that growth with curiosity and empowerment? What would happen if you don't make the necessary changes? So what are the stakes? And what would your life look like if you were able to expand into your fullest potential? And then I give a personal example that's separate from the poem. And then I say, even as I write this, I can feel the charge around that desire. It brings up an immediate emotion and intensity, which allows me to move from my mind into my heart. This is the best place to create from. What would be your example? So it kind of like opens up that space. And if you started to think of like, what is one personal area, you don't have to answer.
I can answer.
Yeah. So that would, is there anything that came to mind? And the only thing I'll say before I let you go into it is it should be something that is a layer deeper. So something that you wouldn't normally share after like 10 minutes at a dinner party meeting somebody.
I think if I'm being really honest, and that's another question I have for you, how do you know if what you're writing is you, or is it back to the poem with the fish? Is it the environment? Is it, how do you find your true voice? But if I'm being completely honest, I think I'd like to be more understanding, see people, be less dismissive, less defensive when people are sharing with me how they're feeling. And so I have that old pattern, and it goes back to my childhood. I didn't learn those skills.
Yeah.
But that's where I would start there.
So I can even tell as you're discussing it, there's emotion there, and it's underneath the surface because you've touched on a nerve of something that's true for you and something that you have a deep desire to work through. Now, there's lots of ways you can work through that. You can go to therapy, you can do a medicine journey, you can meditate, you can do breath work and yoga, you can move your body. There's plenty of ways for us to approach these issues in our lives that we want to work through. But creativity should be on that list. And for me, my lens of creativity is poetry. And if you wrote a poem about that and you removed your need to try to make it great.
So get rid of the expectation.
Don't try to make something great. Make something true. If you make something true, I guarantee it will be great. And make something for you. You don't make something for the sharing. You don't even have to share when you're done. If you create something and you don't feel like sharing it, it's your prerogative, and you still should be celebrated for creating something. But the act of creation, once you're done, then you say, okay, do I want to share this with somebody? And what would it feel like to open up that space?
And that vulnerability that offers so much benefit, what we were talking about earlier, only really comes if what you're sharing is honest.
Yeah.
You're not vulnerable if you're sharing a story that is not truly representative of how you feel.
Yeah.
It might feel like vulnerability, but it's not vulnerability at its core.
Yeah, I agree. And I appreciate you sharing that. Like, I think it could be something worth it for you to dive into in this creative space.
I might write a poem.
You should.
And then
I would love to hear it.
I'll share it with you.
Even if you just call me up, I would love to hear it.
When I was in grade 2, we wrote poems. My mum has some of these. But it got me thinking, like, that creative outlet and creative writing, it was certainly something that I enjoyed, but it was lost. And I think that's common for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think adults calcify. It's a natural kind of like part of getting older.
And play less. Like, it's a form of play, but with words.
How do you find that play in your life? How do you maintain that kind of like exploration and always being a student?
Is that a question?
Yeah.
Getting quiet. So solitude. So I can, I guess, clear distractions and actually hear my voice, hear my thoughts, observe them. Any activity that pulls me in and where I need to be completely present. We were talking earlier about playing games with friends. Like yesterday, we were playing dice, for example. I know acutely, like, I feel the best when I am participating in activities with friends, loved ones, and I'm present. So to answer your question, I think it's just finding ways to get present.
Not being in the future or being in the past, or at least...
Which is a path of least resistance, though, in many ways.
Yeah. But that's scary too, right? It's like, you ever meditate and you're like, oh my God, what is going on up there, All right. It's just like going to a gym for letting go over and over again. Just let go of your thoughts over and over again and return to being here now, which can be extraordinary and surprising in both great and terrible ways.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point, because I've probably avoided, I guess, expressing my emotions even on paper, because it is hard. right? So, if someone is like in being intentional with this and is journaling or poetry and is being really, really honest, it's not easy. It's going to be challenging.
I don't think that any of the modalities that are there as stress release, anxiety release, are necessarily like easy. They can be fun, but they're not easy. And a lot of times they're fun because you fall in love with them not being easy. Like, why do you go to the gym? It's like you fall in love with it not being easy and you see the results. So it expands your time horizon. We have such an instant culture. Everything is now, 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 now. But it's really things that are drawing you into consumption to pull you away from now. So how can you be in the now and also have a longer time horizon? That's a question I ask myself often, and these modalities are part of what kind of like takes me there.
What does a kind of day of writing look like for you? Is there a set practice that you have? Or does it look different every day?
Yeah, it looks different every day, and some days I don't write at all. Sometimes I'll go now weeks without writing anything. I like to wait until I have something to say. I think when you're starting out in an art form, you have to put in your time because you have to learn all the different ways where you can use that thing as a tool or a weapon. But then at a certain point, sometimes less is more. And kind of like what you were saying, solitude, nature, and paying attention, building the muscle of paying attention so that when inspiration comes or when the muse shows up, I don't get distracted and let it pass by. Taking the moment to write it down and almost like putting a pin on the map. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add to what I said, being present with others and listening to them share. Because of what, not only are you learning about them and their experience, but you learn about your experience through that. Mm-hmm. I think that's pretty powerful too.